Hi everyone, it's me Tammy with Happy Rock Crafts. I'm going to show you how I change colors with the Bullion Stitch when I do my scrubbies. I'm going to be using a crochet hook size I, which is a 5.5 millimeter, and this is the Yarnology Luxury Crochet hook from Hobby Lobby that I'm using. I like this hook because it's got a nice long neck for when you're doing your Bullion Stitch wraps. And I'm also going to be using my favorite yarn, as you all know, the Yarn V Scrubology Scrub It yarn from Hobby Lobby. So it's Yarn V Scrubology Scrub It. I'm going to use Lemon. This is 100% nylon. And my contrasting color I'm going to use is the Yarn V Scrubology Scrub It in white. So I already went ahead and I did my 10 half double crochets in my magic circle for our scrubby. And now what we're going to do is we're going to work 2 Bullion stitches into each of those half double crochets around, and we're going to alternate our colors. After we do 2 yellows, we'll do 2 white, 2 yellow, 2 white, and so forth around. And I'll show you how I change my colors. So we're going to chain 2. So 1 and 2. Remember that chain 2 does not count as a stitch, it's just there to give us height. Now we're going to work a Bullion stitch with a wrap of 6. So that means wrap your yarn around your hook 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Insert your hook into that same joining stitch. Oops, yarn over, bring that yarn through and up. Move your fingers over here to the base of those loops. Take this yarn that you just brought through and go underneath each of those loops until you have 2 loops left on your hook. You'll notice I move my fingers and I tug up my yarn a little bit after I go under those loops. And that's because it's going to help me with the tension, and it just helps me work those loops off the hook as well. If you can go underneath more than one, that's great. I just usually do one at a time. And now I'm down to the last 2. I'm just going to yarn over and go over the last 2. So that's our first Bullion stitch. So we're going to do another one in there because we want 2 in every stitch. So we're going to wrap our yarn 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you're going to want to make sure and have your other color handy because we're going to be changing color shortly. So we're going to insert our hook into that same joining stitch. We're going to yarn over and bring that through and up. We're moving our fingers over here to the base of those loops again. We're taking this yarn and we're going to take it underneath each loop until we have 2 loops left on our hook, just like we did in the first one. And I just tug up as I go under those. And now we're down to the last 2. So I'm just going to drop this yellow now. And I'm going to pick up my new color, which is the white. So I have my new color here, and I'm going to hold it in my hand, and I want to leave a little tail because we want to weave that in later. And now what we're going to do is, if you look behind your work, you'll see our working yarn in yellow here that we dropped because we're going to work white. We're going to work around this tail, and we'll be doing that throughout the pattern, and we'll also be doing it with the white. But right now we're just going to yarn over with our new color, which is white here, and bring it through the last 2 loops on our hook. And you'll notice my first 2 Bullion stitches are yellow, and the top of those are yellow as well. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take that new color, the white, and we're going to wrap it around our hook 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we're going to insert it into the next stitch. And before we yarn over, I'm going to make sure that my yellow is right there. So I'm actually inserting my hook underneath that yellow because I'm working over that thread, so it's not so difficult joining and stuff. And now I'm going to yarn over with the white and bring that through, and you'll see I went over that yellow as well. And now I'm moving my fingers over here to the base of those loops, taking this yarn I just brought through and going underneath each of those loops until we have 2 loops on our hook. So we're just working our Bullion stitch like we did before. And now we're down to the last 2 loops. And this looks big, but that's okay because you have your tail that you started with. You can tug on that and you're going to weave that in later, so don't worry about that. You're down to the last 2. We're going to yarn over and go through the last 2 loops. And that's our first one. So we're going to do another white one. So wrap your yarn 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Insert your hook into that same stitch because we want to. And make sure you're also working around that yellow working yarn from the skein. So it's right there on top of my hook. So I'm going to yarn over with the white and bring that through the stitch and up. And now I'm moving my fingers over here to the base of those loops. This is the yarn I just brought through. We're going to take that and go underneath each of those loops until we have 2 loops left on our hook. So just like we did before. And now I'm down to the last 2 loops. I'm going to drop that white and I'm going to pick up this yellow working yarn, and I just tugged on it a little bit, make sure it's nice and not loose. And now I'm going to yarn over and take that yellow and go through the last 2 loops, and you'll see that my white Bullion stitches are completely white, even the tops. And now I have my yellow, and now if you turn your work, you're going to see that white yarn, and we're going to want to work over that white yarn as well, because we're going to be carrying these 2 yarns around with us because we're going to be switching the colors. So now we're going to work 2 Bullion stitches into the next one with our yellow. So again, wrap your yarn 6 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Insert your hook into that stitch and make sure that your white yarn from the working skein is on top of your hook, because you want to work that too. Yarn over with the yellow and bring it through. Move your fingers over to the base of those loops. Take this yarn you just brought through and go underneath each of those loops until you have 2 loops left on your hook. And I know I repeat this a lot, but I always tug up with my hook after I go under those loops, and that's just going to help me with my tension when I get to the last 2. I'm down to the last 2, so I'm going to yarn over and go through those last 2. And now we're going to make another one in there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook in that same stitch because we want 2 in there. Making sure my white yarn is on top of that hook because we want to work that yarn. So I'm yarning over, bringing it through the stitch and up, moving my fingers to the base, taking that yarn and going underneath each of those loops until we have 2 loops left on our crochet hook. Oops. Tugging up, and now I'm down to the last 2 loops. I'm going to drop that yellow, so I'm going to put that yellow back there, grab that white, pick up the white, and hold it with my working yarn hand. And I just pull it a little bit to make sure it's not loose. And now I'm going to take that new color, the white, and pull it through the last 2 loops. And then we're going to make 2 white Bullion stitches into the next one, and we're just going to make sure that we work over that yellow working yarn like we've been. So wrap your yarn 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Insert your hook into that next stitch. Make sure your yellow yarn is on top. Yarn over, bring that yarn through and up. And now move your fingers over to the base, and we're going to take that yarn that we just brought through and we're going to bring it under, we're going to bring it underneath each loop until we have 2 loops left on our hook. Oh, sorry, I'm having some difficulty there with my phone. Okay, so I'm just going underneath each of those loops. I'm down to the last 2. I'm going to yarn over through the last two with my white. And we're going to do that again. So wrap your yarn 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook into that same stitch. Make sure you're working around that yellow yarn, so it should be on top of your hook. Yarn over, bring that yarn through the stitch. Move your fingers over to the base of those loops. Take that yarn you just brought through and work that yarn underneath each loop. Tug up a little bit to help with your tension until you have 2 loops left on your hook. Now we're down to the last 2 loops. I'm going to drop that white, and now I'm going to pick up my yellow, and I just pull it a little bit to make sure it's not loose. Yarn over, take that new color and go through the last 2 loops on my hook. And now we want to make sure we are working over that white, so I just pull it a little bit because we don't want it to be loose. And now we're going to work our 2 yellows in the next stitch over that white. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook into that stitch. The white yarn should be on top because we're working around it. We're going to yarn over, bring that yarn through and up, moving our fingers over here to the base of those loops, taking this yarn that we just brought through and going underneath each of those loops until we have 2 loops left on our hook. And I just tug up as I go under those loops. That just helps. You can go under more than one, that's great. Now I'm down to the last 2. I'm going to yarn over and go through the last 2. And we're going to do another one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting our hook into that same stitch, making sure that white yarn is on top because we're working around it. So I'm going to yarn over, bring that yarn through and up, moving my fingers to the base of all of those loops, and then taking that yarn that we just brought through, and I'm going to take it and work it underneath each of those loops until we have 2 loops left on our hook. And I tug as I go, and that just is going to help with the tension. And now I'm down to the last 2, and we're going to change colors. So I'm going to drop my yellow, and I'm going to pick up my white, pull on it a little bit. We want to make sure it's not super loose. I'm going to yarn over with the new color and bring that through. And now I'm going to do my 2 white in the next stitch, and we want to make sure we're working under or over that yellow. So I'm going to wrap my yarn 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook into that stitch, making sure that yellow is on top. Yarning over, bringing that yarn through the stitch and up. Moving my fingers over here to the base of those loops, taking that yarn again and going underneath each of those loops until we have 2 loops left on our hook. And tugging up as I go. And now I'm down to the last 2. I'm going to yarn over and go through the last 2. Oops, I have to pull some yarn for my skein. Okay, so we're going to do that again. Wrap your yarn 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook into that same stitch, making sure that yellow is on top. Yarning over, bringing that yarn through the stitch and up, moving my fingers over here to the base of those loops, taking this yarn I just brought through and working that underneath each loop until we have 2 loops left on our hook. I'm down to the last 2. I'm going to drop that white yarn. I'm going to pick up that yellow, pull it a little bit because we don't want it to be out there and be loose. Grab my yellow and pull it through the last 2 loops. And now we're working our 2 yellow bullion stitches. And remember to work around your little white one. So wrap your yarn 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Insert your hook into that next stitch. Make sure your white yarn is on top. Yarn over, bring that through and up. take this yarn and go underneath each of those loops until you have 2 loops left on your crochet hook. Make sure to tug up a little bit to help with that tension at the end. I'm down to the last 2. I'm going to yarn over and go through the last 2. And again, because we want 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook into that stitch, making sure my white yarn is on top because we're working over it. Bringing that yarn through and over, and then going underneath each of those loops until we have 2 loops left on our hook. Now we're going to change colors. I'm going to drop that yellow, pick up that white, pull on it a little bit to make sure it's not loose. Make sure that yellow comes back up because we want to work over that yellow. We're going to take that white and go through the last 2 loops on our hook. And again, we're going to do a wrap of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting our hook into the next stitch. And make sure that yellow is on top of that hook because we want to work around it. Yarn over, bring that yarn through the stitch and up. Move your fingers over to the base of those loops and take that yarn you just brought and go underneath each of those loops until you have 2 loops left on your hook. And tug up as you go. That's just going to help. And now I'm down to the last 2. Yarn over and go through the last 2. And again, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook into that same stitch, making sure my yellow yarn is on top of the hook because we're working around it. Yarn over, bring that yarn through and up, move my fingers to the base, taking that yarn I just brought through and going underneath each of those loops until we have 2 loops left on our crochet hook. And now we're down to the last 2. We're going to drop this white yarn and pick up our yellow and just pull on your yellow a little bit. You want to make sure it's not loose. Yarn over with that new color and go through the last 2 loops. And make sure that white yarn is up here now because you want to work over that white. So now we're going to work our 2 bullions. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Insert your hook into that stitch. Make sure your white yarn is on top of that hook. Yarn over, bring it through and up. And then take this yarn you just brought through and go underneath each of those loops until 2 loops remain on the hook. I just gotta pull some yarn out of my skein there. So I'm just going underneath each of those loops, tugging up a little bit as I go. And now I'm down to the last 2. I'm going to yarn over and go through the last 2. And we're going to do that again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook. Make sure your other yarn is on top of that hook. Yarn over, bring that yarn through and up. Move your fingers to the base. Take this yarn that you just brought through and go underneath each loop until you have 2 loops left on your crochet hook. I'm down to the last 2. I'm going to drop that yellow and pick up my white. Yarn over with my white and go through the last 2. And now I want to make sure that yellow's up because we have 1 stitch left and I want to work around that yellow. Now I'm going to wrap my yarn around the hook 6 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook into that next stitch, making sure the yellow's on top, yarning over, bringing that through. And now I'm going to take that and go underneath each of those loops until we have 2 loops left on our hook. I apologize, my skein is not flowing nicely, so I had to pull some white out. So I'm going to take that and go underneath each of those loops. And now I'm down to the last two. I'm going to yarn over and go through the last two. And again, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Inserting my hook into that same stitch, making sure that yellow is on top because we're working around it. Bringing my yarn over and through and up, moving my fingers over here to the base, and going underneath each of those loops until 2 loops remain on my hook. Now I have my 2 loops, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have my trim, my last round, be all white because I did the center in yellow. So let me grab my scissors because I don't need to carry that yellow yarn with me anymore. So I'm going to cut that yellow yarn. Okay, we don't need that. And you just want to make sure you cut enough to weave in. And then I'm just going to move my yellow out of the way so it's not all tangled up. Okay, and then I'm still working with my white. So I'm going to yarn over with that white and go through the last 2. So now we just changed colors, 2 in each one. Super easy, it's just a little more time consuming. So we're going to join with a slip stitch to that first Bullion stitch. We're skipping that chain 2 because remember that was just there for height. Yarn over, bring that through and through the loop on your hook. You're going to chain 1 and then you're going to slip stitch in the next one and chain 1 as well, and you're going to continue to do that all the way around. You're just working a slip stitch and a chain 1 into the top of each of those. Now if you guys wanted to do this from the beginning because you didn't see me do the half double crochets, you can always watch my video. I have a tutorial on how to do this, and I also have the written pattern available on my website, HappyRockCrafts.com, or in my Etsy shop, which is happyrockcrafts.com too. And I'll put that information in the description box below. And I will also put down the crochet hook I'm using and the yarn too. So I'm just working slip stitch, chaining 1 all the way around. So now if you wanted to do like every other Bullion, a different color, you would just do the same thing. You just make sure to yarn over the last 2 loops and work that yarn around the next ones that you do. I just gotta pull some more yarn from this skein. So I'm just working my slip stitch, chain 1 into each of those Bullions. Okay, this was my last one. So what I'm going to do now is an invisible join, and I'll show you how to do that. I don't know why it got dark, so I'm going to turn the lamp on. So for me, when I do the invisible join, I just like to cut a nice little tail because remember you have to weave in those ends, so don't forget to leave a long enough tail to weave in your ends. So now I'm going to go ahead and just pull that loop off of my hook, and now I'm going to take my yarn needle. Oh no, where's my yarn needle? Right there. And I'm going to thread that yarn. There we go. And now if you're looking at your work, let me zoom in a little. Of course it's not going going to let me know. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're just gonna skip over this and we're gonna go in here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go, you can either go from front or back. I usually go from the back. So I'm gonna insert my needle, my yarn needle, underneath both of those loops from the back of the work to the front. Shouldn't be that difficult, silly me. Okay, there we go. So I'm going from the back of my work to the front underneath both loops. And I'm pulling that through. And you'll see here that it just kind of made half a stitch so far. And now we're going to go into that stitch that we pulled our yarn from and went under those two loops. We're going to insert our hook in the center there, and what we're going to do is go underneath that back loop and out into the back and pull that yarn. And when you do that, it makes that look like a stitch, because you're going to weave in your ends and you can't see where that joining stitch is. And that is how you do that. So now if you're looking at your work in the back, because we did some color changes, it's not that bad. You just have a few areas that you're going to have to weave in. Make sure and tug on those and then just weave those in. And that is how you guys do changing colors with the Bullion Stitch. I hope that helped. And if you have any questions, leave me a comment and I will be happy to answer and help in any way I can. So there's our beautiful little scrubby. Just have a few extra ends to weave in, so that's the only difference. But it is nice. I think I might do a red, white, and blue one, which would really be cool. So thanks for watching, you guys. And if you liked it, give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. I appreciate all the support. And once again, there is a written pattern on my Etsy shop or on my website, happyrockcrafts.com. And I have a full tutorial from the beginning to the end on how to make these on my YouTube channel here as well. So have a great night.